hard line between product in one space and marketing in another space is probably the mistake.
We've all heard that we have to be more commercial as a product manager in order to keep our jobs. So what's going wrong?
Product managers need to have is a deeper understanding of how marketing works, how marketing channels work, how the economics work behind them, and why that's important and should be influencing your product decision.
Working with sales teams can be challenging, and maybe sometimes we forget about marketing. But if we did close the gaps here, then we'd be more likely to achieve the impact we're chasing.
You want to do something different. It often takes investment. It's often a bit of a risk, and you've often got to push people out of their comfort zones to get them to do it.
Does that bridge the gap between product and marketing?
Where we're not very far off being able to do live and dynamic pricing.
Hey, it's the Product Experience, and I'm Lily Smith. In this episode, Sally Foote, who has made the move from product to commercial leader and has worked at The Guardian, News International, Photobox, Go Compare, and Carwow, takes us on a journey of how she's developed her commercial knowledge and skills. Sally imparts some great advice on how product can collaborate more closely with marketing and sales for maximum impact.
All of that sales cycle and the data out of that sales cycle is being supported by what the person is doing on your product.
Hi, Sally. Welcome to the Product Experience. How are you?
Hi, Lily. Lovely to see you. Thanks for having me.
So we know each other very, very well, but the audience doesn't know you. So please give us a quick intro to who you are and how you got into product and what you're up to these days.
So I'm Sally Foote, and I have just finished up my role at Carwow, where I was Chief Commercial Officer running Sell My Car, which is their C2B auction platform for cars being sold at dealerships. And I got into product by a very squiggly route. I think that I think you've used the word squiggly to describe your career as well, Lily. I actually studied journalism to start with. But it was interesting as I sort of started to transition into tech, a lot of the skills that I'd learned in journalism turned out to be very similar, about kind of immersing yourself in a problem space, really being able to empathize with someone, understand something from their perspective, but then translate that and reiterate that in a way for a totally different audience to be able to interact with. And often that was between a business and developers or between customers and developers. And I was really at the Times and Sunday Times when I first got into products, launching their paywall there, which was very early days for product as a discipline as a whole, but was a very interesting intersection between consumers who didn't want to pay for things and an organization that needed to have a stronger business model around the excellent editorial it was producing.
And we're going to talk a bit today about sort of the more sort of commercial side of product management, or how product managers can interface better with marketing and sales. You mentioned your role at Carwow as Chief Commercial Officer. So tell us a bit about how you ended up going down that route and how you sort of positioned yourself to get that kind of a job.
I think I was always, even right from those early days at the time, as a very commercial product manager. I always thought of product, I think I described it as a sort of hub and spoke model. It's a very typical model where product is at the center of an organization and is trying to balance multiple things to figure out sort of what to do. And I think, having worked in product for many years, I started to become increasingly frustrated with how few levers it felt like I had to drive growth. Product felt like one of those levers, and I kind of wanted my hands on more of them. And so I started to make a very deliberate transition away from pure play product into kind of what's probably more now a more generic product role. And that started with running innovation at Photobox, where I was building out P&Ls for launching new physical products. And then at Go Compare, I took on marketing, initially sort of performance marketing, so CRM, PPC, search, all sorts of that sort of stuff. And then in my role at Carwow, and actually an even broader portfolio, so including B2C sales and B2B sales, and then also operations eventually as well. And it was a very conscious move of kind of collating more and more experience as I kind of moved from one role to the next.
And we worked together at Go Compare. I worked for you as your head of innovation. And I remember one of the things that you
did to ask me for a review, Lily.
No, it's fine. I remember one of the things you asked me to work on was incentives for customers. And I was a bit like, what? That's not like product. That doesn't make any sense. And you were like, no, 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 this is going to be a really good experience for you. And I was so glad that I did it. And it's been so useful since then. And I think another of the things that I learned was that you kind of talked about a lot was growth levers, which you've mentioned just then. So explain a little bit about what you mean by a growth lever.
Sure. So I think a traditional view of product tends to be, if you kind of rolled back sort of, let's say 10 years, and what product was, it was your website or your app. And so the product manager's job was to figure out what features a product should have. So what features should be on the website or what features should be in the app. And really, that isn't the customer's experience of that business, and actually how that website or that app interacts with each other and what's on offer is also part of a broader proposition. And so I suppose it starts to think about product as the proposition or everything that you're putting in front of a customer. So when you're thinking about it through that lens, then you're suddenly thinking about it in terms of not only how you acquire customers and how they interact with your product, but how you retain them, and all the different sets of things that you could be doing to drive both of those, both that acquisition and retention play. And that goes well outside the product remit, the traditional product remits, and quite often into the marketing space. So I think growth levers can be anything from a feature on a website, all the way through to, as you said, like a discount. It can be a growth lever, or a particular marketing mechanic can be a growth lever.
I've literally been talking to the team about it today. So it's very, very poignant in all of our conversations right now. So working as a more sort of commercial lead in a business, what are the things that you see product managers doing that is a kind of mistakes that you see them making in their working with marketing and sales and, with that sort of broader view as a commercial lead in a business?
I think sort of rolling back a little bit to sort of that more traditional view of product was this understanding that, if your job was a product manager, then you would build this outstanding product and people would discover it. And once they discover it, they would never leave and they would just continue to use it. And that actually, once you'd done your work to build an amazing product, the rest wasn't your job. And you could just take that and hand it over to the marketing team, and that they would generate you an audience and bring it in. And actually that kind of hard line between product in one space and marketing in another space is probably the mistake that I still see across different conversations in different organizations that I work in. That line has become a lot more blurred, particularly sort of, I suppose, over the last sort of 5 or 6 years now, where audiences don't think about your business in that way. And so product managers can't think about their product in that way, and marketeers can't think about the messages that they're putting in front of consumers in that way. So really, from a commercial point of view, product manager's role is to think about all of those interaction points and be thinking about marketing as one of the big levers that they are using to drive the growth of their product. I think the other thing that, and many listeners will hate me for saying this, because product managers hate being part of feature teams or being locked into schedules and plans. But actually, the reason why the rest of the organization loves a roadmap, even though product teams don't always love them, is because they provide a structure that the rest of the organization can function around and can leverage. And actually, that is one of the common friction points. And I suppose what I would really encourage product managers to be thinking about is that shouldn't be a friction point. It's actually a tool. It's a tool that you can use to leverage the rest of the organization in your growth planning.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything else that's kind of been a surprise or like a big learning from moving into that type of more commercial role?
I suppose I spent a lot of time trying to understand marketing a lot better. And that's been a key part of all of the roles that I've had to do. And I think actually the more that I've understood about marketing, the more I felt that it's a fundamental skill that product managers need to have, is a deeper understanding of how marketing works, how marketing channels work, how the economics work behind them, and why that's important and should be influencing your product decisions. Mm-hmm. And I think it's particularly pertinent at the moment because marketing is changing so much and so rapidly. So if you think about the demise of search and everything that's happening in Google with AI summaries and what that's going to do from a PPC point of view, let alone an organic search point of view, it's really important that product managers understand that those challenges are impacting the marketeers and how they're thinking about bringing an audience in. But also you've got to be redesigning and rethinking the way your product is getting to market and what your product actually is in order to be able to function in a world in which those marketing channels are changing to that degree.
It definitely feels like there's a lot of kind of turmoil in marketing, as you say, and I feel like there's a lot of scrambling around, sort of almost redefining whole businesses as we're now an AI first, blah, 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 or here's all of our AI features. And I imagine marketing teams all over the place are sort of trying to stand out from the crowd and with all of this noise and all of these promises of like what these new AI features can do for customers. You've mentioned that it's good for product managers to support or try to understand the challenges from the marketing team's perspective with all of this. But what's the best way for people to really get into the shoes of the marketer, as it were, in this sort of day and age?
I think the first thing to do is anyone's got to understand the economics. So you've got to understand where your marketing teams are spending money, and how they are understanding the return on the investment of that money. And usually what you'll see is that you have a clear marketing funnel, which starts with kind of discovery, and then right at the bottom, you've got people who are kind of ready to transact. And that's typically where PPC operates. And the challenge at the moment with PPC is that those audiences grow in cost kind of every single year. That just incrementally goes up because competitors are bidding against each other, and it gets noisier and noisier at the bottom of that funnel where people are kind of ready to transact. And so when you're looking at a problem like that, trying to bring an audience that's increasingly expensive at the bottom of the funnel ready to transact, you can't actually continue to solve that problem through more marketing in that space. You can't buy your way out of that from a PPC point of view. It's just going to become uneconomical to continue buying that audience. And that's where I think products can come in to kind of help to rethink that problem. So if you look back to kind of some of the stuff that we did at Go Compare, the whole strategy behind the 250 excess, which means that if you get your cover through, if you get your insurance through Go Compare, then Go Compare will cover your excess on your car or on your home insurance if you make a claim. And the point of that was to create a differentiated proposition that got people out of Google and got them coming directly back to the site, because that PPC space was becoming so messy and competitive. When you think about the main thing that you need to create in that messy PPC space is differentiation. What is differentiation driven by? It's driven by product. And so when you look at like challenges like that, it's about product managers sitting down with their marketing teams and really understanding where the big audience challenges are and how the marketeers are thinking about tackling those, because it's going to be a limit to what they can do themselves. And there's going to be adjustments that you're going to need to make and drive from a product point of view that's going to give them the tools that they need to be able to get better economics out of those channels.
I imagine it's different in bigger organizations, but one of the other things that I've seen working really well in our team at BBC Maestro is we do a lot of user research and user testing within products. And so I've been kind of like pulling that more into the marketing team, which they're not, they're used to kind of being driven more by results and the quantitative data rather than the qual insights. And so actually bringing that in has been really interesting. Those teams like working closer together over those insights and gathering those insights, which is quite nice.
Exactly. But also I think what's really interesting, and I think you don't really get to see this until you're in the detail of it, is what is the type of information that you can collect through your product that you can feed into your marketing model. So pretty much all paid marketing is driven by algorithmic sets of data, and those data sets are fed from your product or your organization, and they're given a model, it's given to Google, and Google will bid off that model. And the more data rich and the more accurate that model is, the better the bidding can be in terms of finding lookalike audiences or figuring out or being able to predict what the revenue is going to be from a transaction. And so actually there's things to be thought about there in terms of how your product is designed to maximize the data you're collecting to drive your marketing. And we think about the circularity of that, and that relationship between marketing and product gets very, very interesting. But until you're sitting down with the marketeers and really understanding how those Google algorithms are working, it's very difficult to figure out what other data you could be complementing.
And where do growth teams come into all of this? We were chatting before we started the interview about 11 Labs. We had someone from 11 Labs at the last Mind the Product conference, and he was talking about how they don't have product managers. They just have growth people. And There's no hierarchy. No one's got job titles, so I don't really know how they do hiring. But is this the answer? Is this the way forward? Like we all just become people working on the business, trying to make an impact.
I think it's interesting, and I would love to be a fly on the wall and see how that's going, because I wonder about its scalability across kind of bigger organizations. I think most startups start in a small and scrappy way. In any small organization you work in, you generally get to wear lots of hats and try out different things. And it's one of the great joys of working in a smaller organization. But I think as you scale, you tend to need to put structures in. And having just been in a business where, we've just been going through that scale up journey, that's exactly, you start off with very rough and ready OKRs. And then by the time, 3 years later, a very formal planning cycle every quarter for the scale and size of that business. So I think there's almost certainly challenges around that in terms of scalability. But I do think it's interesting because I think that kind of view of the product manager as a mini GM or a mini CEO inside a business is still fundamentally true. And I think what we're seeing now in terms of kind of the range of customer touch points and where those are owned, it's not clear, where those owned. You think about who has responsibility for retention within an organization. And you just think about that, right? So some of it is done by product, some of it's done by CRM, some of it's done by other interaction points. And so you might have a sales team who are on the phones, you might have a chat app, etc. Like how do you divide that between product and marketing? Shouldn't that be one role who's worrying about the retention of customers? And so actually maybe what you need is an acquisition role and a retention role. And actually how do those two things interact with each other? Because increasingly product and marketing are very blended in terms of the skill sets that you need and the platforms that you're operating on.
And what does a sort of healthy relationship between product and marketing look like versus an unhealthy relationship?
I think you can see it, as soon as you go and look at a product, you can see the consistency of the messaging. You can see that the ads are relating to the features that are available. You can see a consistent message from your initial touch points into the product. And so you can see it from the outside. But from the inside, what you're seeing is an organization that's probably aligned around the same goal. So there's an argument that says that the PM should be as targeted on the ROI of the marketing channels as the marketeer is, right? Because ultimately the more effective your product funnel is, the more effective your product conversion funnel is, the closer that should be to basically being able to spend more and bring more traffic into the top of your funnel. And so I think where you can look at plans or pieces of work that are going on within an organization, you can see the correlation between them. That looks like a good, that's what good looks like. And I referenced a moment ago, just also that ability to collect and share data between those two parts of the organization is absolutely critical, and vice versa, right? Like how you're understanding the size of an audience on a platform or the performance of a particular feature on a particular platform, and that feeding back from marketing into product as well.
And you've kind of hinted at it a little bit there, but when you've taken on leadership of some of these organizations from a broad point of view, and then you're able to kind of make adjustments and make changes, like what are the adjustments and changes that you've made that you've seen have had the biggest impact in these different functions kind of working better together?
So I suppose one of the things that one of the channels that I've got to know very well particularly across the last 2 years is an affiliate channel. A lot of increasingly, as Google becomes a very challenging market channel, people are looking at partnerships and affiliate partnerships, and those are probably sort of varying levels of maturity. And the traditional affiliate model is that you call someone up and you say, hey, you've got a page of information about X, Y, and Z. My product would fit really well on there, and they put a tiny little link on their page, and then you pay them for everyone who comes from that. And the challenge of that model, of course, is that it very quickly, where you've got competitors, gets into well, I'll pay more for the leads you send me versus what my competitor would. And you just erode ROI. Same problem, right? Same problem, eroding ROI. But what we did at Carwow is we turned that into a product problem. And we're like, as soon as you had someone with a product mindset looking at that relationship, they were like, well, we don't want to be on that page tucked into the bottom of their website anyway. We want to be much higher up in their journey and the core of their site. And actually, they don't want to put us there because they don't want us to interrupt their core journey, because we're adding a click out off their site into our site. And so the product mindset, when you look at that problem, you take that marketing problem, you look at it from a product lens, is actually, let's create a Carwow widget that it can be embedded into their site that will do what we want it to do, which in this case was to value someone's car. We won't take them off the site at all. We'll let them have the value, the thing that they're trying to do, which is value their car, and they'll do that on a third-party website, but we'll collect their data in the background. And suddenly we're having a much more interesting conversation with affiliate relationships, because we are not going to take their traffic off. We're going to monetize it in the middle of their journey. And so we're going to monetize a lot more of their customers, and we're not going to disrupt their core business model. And so we weren't in a head-to-head competition with our competitors. And also we'd created a really useful tool from a customer point of view, because you weren't also trying to get them off the site. The customer doesn't want to leave the site that they're on. They're busy doing something. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a particularly interesting example of where you take someone with a really product-oriented mindset and you focus them on a marketing problem. And I think those are the types of solutions that emerge when you think of these two functions as interconnected.
This episode is brought to you by Airtable Product Central. Quick question. Right now, can you see which product teams are working on which strategic priorities and how they're making progress? If you're juggling scattered decks, spreadsheets, and tools, probably not.
Product Central changes that. AI monitors and aligns your entire portfolio to your top priorities, from strategy to execution to outcomes. Exec-ready status updates are sent automatically, teams get flagged when strategy drifts, and everything can be queried conversationally. Questions like, which initiatives are at risk, get instant data-backed answers that link directly to relevant documentation.
And here's the real impact. Fortune 100 companies have created a single unified roadmap across business units. They've automated executive reporting and transformed annual planning down from months to weeks.
See what's possible at airtable.com/product central. That's airtable.com/product central.
What was the sort of response from the team when you were like, hey, product person, you're going to work on a marketing problem, and marketing team, you're going to have a product person work on your marketing problem? Were they happy, or were they just like...
No, they weren't. I mean, totally honestly, the product team did not really want to build this because it wasn't part of their core product. And the marketing team, it took a lot of work to get them to really understand what we were trying to do and why it was important, because mostly we were talking to people who had been for most of their career working in a very traditional affiliate model and knew how to sell that, knew how to negotiate it, etc. And so I think when you're trying to do something that's a bit different like that, you need someone who's going to push it all through. And yeah, it definitely wasn't easy to get everyone on board with that. But I think that's often that's the challenge with innovation anyway, isn't it? It's like, you want to do something different. It often takes investment. It's often a bit of a risk, and you've often got to push people out of their comfort zones to get them to do it.
And I imagine as an outcome of seeing it working well, then everyone's like, oh, okay, yeah, fair enough. That was a good idea.
Yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about marketing and a lot about product. What's your sort of view of product marketing? Does that bridge the gap between product and marketing? It feels like probably not, but what's your perspective on it?
Interesting, isn't it? Because I think you can find so many different definitions of what product marketing is. I mean, some of my team would describe product marketing as closer to product-led growth as opposed to kind of marketing of the product. And I think actually really it's a discipline within either of those two departments. But I also think it's a little bit more about it tends to edge more towards positioning rather than the holisticness of what we're talking about here. I think what's interesting, I think you can talk about how marketing supports product or how to market product, but actually what's interesting about what's emerging now is that this intersection of the two disciplines is creating all sorts of different ways of thinking about both disciplines. And I don't think that product marketing goes far enough to describe that, because it's a little bit more about marketing the product than this intersection of product marketing, which is probably why I prefer the growth as a wrapper, because it's more holistic in terms of thinking about both of these things as levers and how do you kind of plug them together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the other things that's really interesting about your experience is you've got the B2C and the B2B sort of angle of things. I feel like a lot of the examples that we've talked about have been mainly on the sort of B2C side, but What about the B2B side? Like, what should product managers be thinking of from a marketing point of view on the B2B side? Do we just leave it all to the sales enablement teams?
So I think it's a huge topic, right? And it's going to vary across different organizations, because I think in some organizations, the B2B sales team, actual people, might be quite small, and a lot of the B2B sales might be done through self-service or through a freemium model, for example. But if you have got a B2B sales team, which we did at Carwow, who were engaging dealers in our products and onboarding them, there's so much to leverage from that team from a product point of view. I think the first thing to figure out is, what does that sales cycle look like? How do you find people, how the sales team find people that they want to talk to? What's the conversation that they need to have? And then how long is that sales cycle, and what are the stages in it? And the reason why that's important is because at any point in time, what is your product going to enable them to demo? How do you break out components of that product to enable someone to get onto it and to trial it? And what are the things that you as a product manager can enable for your sales team? So, for example, one of the things that we trialed at Carwow was we ahead of all the sales meetings, we set people's accounts up. So they hadn't said they wanted to come on board. We set them all up. We got them. So by the time someone went in to demo the product, the person could actually log on as themselves, and they could start bidding on cars straight away. And that was a really different way of presenting the product, rather than trying to convince someone, getting them back on board, et cetera, et cetera. And a really important part of that, of course, also is the early life cycle. So, how long does it take for someone to stabilize as a B2B customer before they've got into the habit that you're trying to build for them? And what are the things that drive that? And of course, then all of that sales cycle and the data out of that sales cycle is being supported by what the person is doing on your product. So are you taking data from your product and integrating that back into all the sales tools, so that the person who's ringing up 2 days later to say, oh, and how did that log on go? And okay, you've discovered this feature, etc., has all of the information about how that user has used the product. I mean, I feel like I could talk about this for ages, because there's so much to talk about. And that's maybe one other point, which I referenced earlier, is this kind of product team tape being feature teams. But actually, B2B teams, B2B sales teams need a reason to go back and interact with people who've dropped off the platform, or prospects who they weren't able to interest last time, with something new and shiny and exciting every quarter. And you can actually help to drive the sales cycle through a quarter, saying this quarter is going to be about X, Y, and Z. And that actually becomes a really good mechanic for sales teams to be able to go, okay, Q1, we're going to talk about this. Q2, we're going to talk about that. And there, the product manager is actually driving the sales cycle, because they're giving that mechanic into the sales team to kind of get them back into market and give them a reason to go back out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the problems that we hear coming up a lot with B2B product managers is that they tend to be sort of quite hands off from customers, and that customers generally will talk to salespeople, and that the product managers are a little bit far removed. What would be your advice on trying to understand what it is the customers kind of want and need? Like, can you just rely on the salespeople, or do you actually need to get in front of the customers themselves?
You have to get in front of the customers themselves. I think salespeople have a very specific job, right? They have something which is, from their point of view, relatively static, right? They're not thinking about how to evolve a product. They'll be listening to what their customers want, but the vast majority of salespeople are very focused on, I'm going to close a deal, I'm going to try and close as fast as I can. And if that deal isn't going to close, I'm going to quickly move on to the next one. And so they're not going to be approaching that conversation with the same mindset as a product person, who's going to be listening for needs, wants, friction points, points of interest. And every time you put a product person into a sales pitch meeting, or sitting at a desk next to a B2B customer, they will spot something that a salesperson has not spotted, because they're just looking, they've got a different agenda in that conversation. I think it's such good fuel for creativity and for accuracy in terms of what you're building, is just constantly being out in market. One of the other things, which I know loads of people do, but so effective for us at Carwow, again, was building an advisory panel. So we would get a bunch of car dealers, most of whom were competitors with each other, most of whom weren't very keen to talk to each other, into a room to discuss something really difficult and complex that we were nervous about doing. So when we launched our auction model, which none of the dealers told us they wanted, they didn't want to be competing with each other on price. They wanted to be able to take things out of market rather than kind of fight over them in an auction. We got this room full of people and we talked through all of the difficult pain points. And actually, instead of us defending our position, they land up having that kind of conversation with each other. And it was incredibly useful to see these different perspectives emerging. And not only did we get ideas about how to shape the product to work better for some of the challenges, just crazy things like they were like, don't have the auction end at the same time as your competitors, because that's a nightmare for us. We want them to end at different times. We're like, oh yeah, that's a really good point. But also we could see, we got great language. We got in their own words how they would defend that position or how they would market that position to themselves, because they were doing it to each other in the room. And the power of those types of conversations is enormous. And so I'd really recommend that. I'd really recommend those types of mechanics. I think also, I think the other thing that we're seeing emerge is with growth teams as well, and where there's customization of a product, or particularly in some of the AI tooling where there's training to be done of training models, the product managers or the engineers are very, very customer facing, because they're embedded in those organizations in order to set those products up or to train those models. And they're actually not only often kind of going in to do the initial installation, they have to go and find the next project as well. And so there's a crossover set starting to emerge between product managers and salespeople. And actually, do product managers also need to start to acquire sales and consultancy skills, in terms of being able to take some of these products to market. And so maybe we do come all the way back to an organization where roles become much more fluid, and there's a lot more mixing of the skill sets that you need as a product manager.
And I've heard of people using LLMs to pretend to be customers and things like that as well. Have you tried that at all, or kind of come across people doing that?
Lily, I've been having so much fun with this over the last few weeks. I mean, I think, the very simple way of doing this is with custom GPTs, where you can create personas and you can interview those personas, and you can use collections of those personas in all sorts of different ways. I've been talking to CEOs who've created their board in a set of custom GPT personas and use that as a way to kind of interrogate themselves before their board meetings, or who are creating their customer personas and then interviewing those customer personas about ideas that they're exploring. I took a very interesting look at a tool this week called Your Focus Group .ai, which has been developed by a small business called Rocket Makers. And that is an AI tool that enables you to create a focus group. So you type in what you want your focus group to be about. It creates the personas. You can make some adjustments to those personas, and then you can interview that focus group on a topic. And I was, that the stuff is good, right? But blown away by the quality of the thinking that you're getting back from that. And I'm not yet in the camp of this will entirely replace focus groups, because I think there's definitely some element of spontaneity and creativity, etc., that you get. But I do think one of the things that's particularly interesting for B2B research is that you can create a focus group for people that you would never be able to get in a room. So you can create, very senior stakeholders. And I'm sure we're kind of, weeks away from being able to train the personas in that group on LinkedIn profiles or articles that people have written, and being able to interrogate those people on what they would say about an idea or how they would respond to something that you're doing. I think that's incredibly fascinating, because the power of the insights that you can get back and the kind of leap that you can take on the start of your kind of product discovery journey is phenomenal, and quite exciting, actually.
I think that the first thing I do is like put a load of product people that I know in the room, and then
well, exactly.
I mean, listen to them complaining about being a product manager.
Council, yeah.
So what are some of the other ways that PMs can learn from or work better with the commercial sales teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've probably talked through quite a lot of them in terms of sort of being able to use them as a route to customers, being able to use them to test ideas with a Carwow, anything that we wanted to do, both from a kind of proposition point of view or from a product point of view, started with our commercial teams. Like, what do you think? Does this work? How would you sell this? How would you talk about this? What's this set of dealers going to say? What's this set of dealers going to say, etc. But I think then once you've built something, and you're taking that to market, and I talked about this kind of like quarterly, you can't expect a sales team to take 10 things to market in a quarter. You've got to be able to bundle those in some way so that they can work through a set of customers. And they've got a very clear and concise message to be able to take to market in a period of time. But the thing to also make sure is that the commercial teams are incentivized around that. So you might have kind of core incentivizations for commercial teams around their revenue streams or their kind of cost base or whatever the case it may be, but using that commercial incentive to drive particular product features. So when you launched a wallet feature at Carwow, which enabled us to take the transaction or take the fees for the car that was changing hands, our commercial teams had at least 6 months of incentivization around wallet, just adoption. People just had to get people through the KYC process and on and get their first transactions through. And that is absolutely what drove the growth and adoption of that quite a high friction product because you were going through a big KYC process as a business at the start. And so you needed someone who was very commercially driven and very incentivized to help that their partners through that. And I think that's a really important part about getting the most you can from your commercial teams for growing a product.
And we've talked a lot about commercials. It would be wrong of us to not talk about pricing. And this is often sort of a bit of a hot potato, or maybe is it a hot potato? You kind of don't want to hold the hot potato, but I feel like people actually want to hold this. So maybe this is a very cold potato, but like who should own pricing in the organization?
$1 million question, right? I mean, I think we're also here. There's another place where we're at a very interesting intersection, because I think if you look at the way pricing historically was done, as you would get, particularly for B2B businesses, you'd get a very specialist consultancy like Simon Kucher in, and they would help you to think through what your market looked like and what your competitor set looked like and what your business model looked like and where you should be pricing. But I actually think we're edging towards no one being responsible for those decisions, because if you look at the level of capability that we're seeing in AI in terms of being able to understand market pricing and the level of data that it can get access to and synthesize, we're probably not that far off having to go to big data sets to be able to figure out what your competitor pricing is. And we're also at a point where we're not very far off being able to do live and dynamic pricing. So will we see kind of published rate cards structurally change shape, and actually will you start to move to like much more kind of usage-based pricing, and that usage-based pricing being determined by all sorts of different factors. But I think we're probably not far off moving to a world in which it's not a person's job to decide pricing. I think that's quite exciting actually, because I think it opens up all sorts of different possibilities.
Okay, and we often talk about kind of sales-led organizations, marketing-led, technology-led, and then product-led. Although I feel like product-led, because product is that, Venn diagram of sales, customer, and technology, or commercial and technology. Oh no, hang on, I've said that wrong, but everyone knows what I mean. So I feel like product-led is kind of like everything working balanced and even together, but sales-led is kind of, more of an emphasis on doing what sales need and being a sales organization, marketing-led being very kind of like led by what marketing need and brand and all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, technology is being led by the tech. Is product-led just always the way to go because it's the balanced approach, or is there a world in which those other formats work?
So I love this question. It's because it's really making me think, and I wonder whether it's less about you can define an organization forever as needing to be X, Y, or Z, right? Does it need to be product-led? Does it need to be marketing-led? And actually, do you need to think about it in terms of sort of eras of an organization's life cycle? And I think, all the way back again to the Times and Sunday Times, when we were building the paywall, we had to be a product-led organization because we were building 2 new big websites. We had to think about what's this experience going to look like when someone signs up to this paywall, etc. And so there's a massive transformation in the kind of consumer experience. But once we built that, and we built this at the time, it was a very hard paywall. So you got like the homepage and a sign-up page, and that was sort of it. it very much needed to then shift into a marketing-led organization, because the job to be done then was to, having initially signed up the existing Times audience, was to go and get a whole new audience alongside that. And so the weight of where that organization was focused had to shift much more towards marketing. And at the time, some of that was being done by product, but a lot more of it was being done by marketing. Whereas then you look at, Go Compare, which was a marketing-led organization, it was effectively just a marketing machine. And the reason that I was there and why I brought you in was because it needed to shift towards a product organization, and it needed to go back to the core of what it was about, which was about a consumer experience and a differentiated proposition. And that's what it was trying to do. And so it went through an era of doing that. And I think any organization you look at, I think some of them, look at, for example, Future Publishing, where we both spend time, a very, very acquisitive business, constantly integrating businesses, probably much more on a kind of marketing, so arguably sort of a content marketing business. Whereas you get, another business as I was looking at last week was they've built their product, it's pretty close to product market fit. They don't think there's a lot to do to unlock their TAM, and really it's just about hard sell of that product for the next 6 months at least, to understand whether, before they hit any kind of ceiling that means they need to do another product transformation, they can probably do a level of product maintenance. And I think, in a world in which there's probably a lot less funding slashing around than there was sort of 2 or 3 years ago, probably tighter business economics across most markets, that makes sense, because you can't do everything at once. And so thinking about organizations going through eras in terms of where they're investing and where they're making changes, maybe a helpful lens.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Okay, so we just have time for one more question, and it's a bit of a funny one. But if you had to choose, it's like pop quiz. If you had to choose sales, marketing, or product, and stick to that for the rest of time, which one would it be?
Oh, it's a terrible question. I feel like, Harry Potter at the end of the series, where he's got like the wand, the cloak, and the stone, and now he has to choose one. I think, inevitably I would have to choose products. I can't imagine doing a job that doesn't have some control over product or ability to drive product. But I also think product has the power to consume the others. And arguably it's becoming both of the others in a way that sales can never become product, because it's two very, very different things. But I think product can be more sales and product can be more marketing. And so I think I'd have to choose product.
Well, Sally, thank you so much for joining us and imparting all of your wise words and wisdom to us. It's been really great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Lily. Lovely to be here.
The Product Experience hosts are me, Lily Smith, host by night and Chief Product Officer by day.
And me, Randy Silver, also host by night. And I spend my days working with product and leadership teams, helping their teams to do amazing work.
Luron Pratt is our producer, and Luke Smith is our editor.
And our theme music is from product community legend Arnie Kittler's band, POW. Thanks to them for letting us use their track.